really important to realize that when you let someone like Miss Rachel into your kids' lives through the television, you are letting in a proxy to terrorism.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, really.
Why don't people care about kids who are born in certain places? You could have been born there, your kids could have been born there. I'm sick of people not caring because of the color of kids' skin, or not caring because they were born in a certain place, or not caring because they're a certain religion. These are children's lives.
And the fact that this woman is, for some people, the educator of their children and on the iPad, to me, that's also another element of this that I find deeply disturbing.
Yeah, well, Miss Rachel is not allowed in my house, so.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you.
We don't care.
Jerry.
What made you speak out about other people's human rights but not the children of Gaza? Did you not see these kids as kids because of where they were born?
This woman fills me with so much anger I didn't even know it was humanly possible, because she's such a hypocrite and she's so phony about it. She'll sit there and she'll wag the finger at us, Miss Advocate for all children.
Somebody is going to have to explain this one to me, because I sat down, I rolled up my sleeves, and I went down the rabbit hole on this whole Miss Rachel situation. I read the tweets, I watched the clips, I skimmed the think pieces. I genuinely expected, at some point, to hit that moment where I go, oh, okay, right, there it is. I get it now. And I never got there. Look, I'm not saying you have to agree with her. I'm not saying you have to sign off on every single political conclusion she's ever reached. That's not the point. What I'm saying is, I genuinely, fundamentally do not understand what people think she's doing wrong by advocating for children. She's a children's educator. She's advocating for children. Where exactly did she leave her lane? Because if tomorrow Miss Rachel logs on and starts giving us cryptocurrency advice, absolutely, we've left the building. If she uploads a video called 5 stocks I'm buying before the Fed meeting, okay, I'm gonna have some questions. That would be weird. But Palestinian children, Israeli children, an American teenager whose family is begging for answers about his death, I'm struggling to locate the dramatic career change here. I'm struggling to find the part where she veered off course. It feels like the lane she's always been in just got longer. And maybe somebody watching this can explain it to me. Because I think Miss Rachel has accidentally stumbled into one of the strangest, most uncomfortable things about human empathy. Everybody loves empathy when it's hypothetical. Be kind, beautiful. Protect children, obviously. Care about other people. Put it on a coffee mug, stick it on a bumper sticker, nobody's fighting about it. We all agree. But then you name an actual child, or you point to an actual war, or you gesture toward an actual racial issue. And suddenly, we're not talking about compassion anymore. Suddenly, we're negotiating the terms and conditions. We're checking the fine print. We're asking, yes, but does this one count? So today, I don't really want to ask whether Miss Rachel has become too political. That question bores me. I want to ask something much more specific, something that cuts a little closer to the bone. What exactly do people want Miss Rachel to stop doing?
So Miss Rachel takes the time out of her day to teach y'all's raggedy kids how to talk, how to read, how to do all these things, and y'all unfollow her just because she said justice for Nolan Wells? Do y'all hate black people that much? Like,
you're gonna cancel Miss Rachel? You're gonna cancel the most wholesome person in the world because she came out and said something about Nolan Wells? You really are a bunch of racists.
Miss Rachel did not say any race deserved to die. She did not condemn anyone. She said black boys deserve to live, and is now under fire, under siege, for the simple statement of black boys deserve to live, to reach adulthood and live. Our insistence upon existence is not a threat to yours. How dismal is it that as a society, we've gotten to the point where the worst thing a marginalized group can do to you is threaten to exist and grow old? Maybe I'm too woke. Maybe I'm too woke, Nolan Wells should have been able to have his daughter. All of these kids should have been able to grow up.
For anyone who hasn't followed this story, and honestly, I don't blame you if you haven't, because it's one of those cases that somehow slipped through the cracks of the national conversation. Nolan Xavier Wells was an 18-year-old black teenager. He disappeared during a 4th of July boat trip near Horn Island, Mississippi. He was with 3 white friends. His body was found 2 days later. And ever since then, his family has been pushing, scraping, fighting for answers. They commissioned an independent autopsy. That autopsy listed his cause and manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation, which is a clinical way of saying, we don't know what happened and we're not sure we're going to find out. I want to be really careful here because this is still an open investigation. I'm not here to play detective. I'm not here to declare what did or didn't happen. But here's what Miss Rachel did. She posted about the case. She said she believed the investigation and everything that followed would have been handled differently if Nolan were white and his friends were black. She also said Nolan and his family deserve justice. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Now, if your criticism is, Sage, I don't think she should state that as certainty. We can't rerun reality. We can't switch everyone's race and compare the results. That's a bold claim to make with absolute confidence. Okay. That's an actual argument. That's a conversation. We can have that. We can disagree about how confidently she should make that claim, about whether she should have phrased it as a question instead of a statement. That's fair. That's reasonable. But that's not where the criticism stops, is it? Because very quickly the conversation pivots. It becomes, why is Miss Rachel talking about this at all? And that's where you lose me. That's where I start blinking at the screen like I missed a memo. Because saying that Nolan's family deserves answers and justice is somehow inappropriate because she teaches children? Explain that connection to me. Walk me through the logic, because I genuinely do not see the through line. And please, please, don't just tell me she's being political. That word has become a catch-all for saying something that makes me uncomfortable. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's lost all its teeth. Tell me what she actually did that you believe was wrong. Name the action. Point to the offense. Because I disagree with what she said, and she shouldn't be allowed to say it, are 2 completely different arguments. And I think a lot of people are using the second one when they only have standing for the first.
Yesterday we learned that Miss Rachel donated $3,000, which is the maximum amount you can give, to the Senate candidacy of Abdul al-Sayed, who has very close ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. But it's really important to realize that when you let someone like Miss Rachel into your kids' lives through the television, you are letting in a proxy to terrorism. I feel so strongly about this. I received a note recently from a friend of mine who's a young mom who's not Jewish, who said, I know you don't like Miss Rachel because of all the stuff she's doing about Israel, but she's just so great with my kids. Guess what? There is no delineation between Ms. Rachel's political views and what she does in entertaining her children. There are other children's entertainers out there who are not disseminating propaganda from terrorists. We have to start being very comfortable naming what this is. These people, whether it's Brad Lander, whether it's Ms. Rachel, whether it's Cynthia Nixon, whether it's Mamdani, they are spouting terrorist propaganda.
Stop letting your children watch Miss Rachel.
Oh my God, what did she do?
Just last week, we learned that Miss Rachel donated the maximum individual contribution to Abdul al-Sayed's campaign, $3,000.
Okay, so you're upset because as someone who focuses on children and protecting all children, she contributed to a candidate who is against sending our money to slaughter children.
Much like Miss Rachel, al-Sayed has also faced criticism for buddying up with openly anti-Semitic individuals.
I see. So being a journalist trapped inside of a concentration camp that is being indiscriminately bombed and then reporting the news from the ground while being targeted on camera by the IOF makes you anti-Semitic.
I don't know about you, but Miss Rachel is no longer allowed in our household, and I think most of you know why. And now St. John's University is conducting a study on selective humanitarian messaging in children's media, focusing on Miss Rachel and perceptions of victimhood, narrative balance, and anti-Semitic erasure, and discussions surrounding the Israel-Hamas conflict. So, if you identify as Jewish from any country, if you're familiar with Miss Rachel, and if you have an interest in anti-Semitism, media influence, or children's educational content, you are invited to participate.
Miss Rachel is under her 47,000th controversy for, I guess, because she tweeted that black boys deserve to live, which I guess is too woke for the current zeitgeist, apparently. Y'all are too unserious for words. I don't even understand. I don't even understand you can, go through life and be, angry at a children's show host for being hey, kids should not be killed. The fact that that is something that can get her dragged all over the fucking internet and treated like a motherfucking terrorist, just not wanting kids to die. That's crazy. Notice she didn't say white boys deserve to die. That I could see having an issue with. That's not what she said, though, is it? That's not what she said. She said black boys deserve to live. And that's upsetting, y'all? Every time I hear of a controversy with Miss Rachel and I look into it, it always boils down to the same thing. Her being consistent in her belief that children have a right to life and liberty, and people being mad at her for that because some kids apparently don't deserve those things. Y'all aren't serious people.
Let's get something straight right away. The Nolan Wells controversy didn't happen in a vacuum. It's not some isolated incident that popped up out of nowhere. Miss Rachel has been taking heat for over a year now. Intense, relentless, sometimes genuinely unhinged backlash, all because she dared to advocate for Palestinian children in Gaza. Let me say that again. She advocated for children. And the response? She's been accused of being anti-Semitic. She's been called a Hamas sympathizer. Not she has sympathies for Hamas. Not she's too critical of Israel. No, a straight-up Hamas sympathizer. As if she's out here flying flags and praising terrorists. That's the level we're operating on. And then it gets even wilder. Stop Anti-Semitism, an organization that literally exists to monitor and call out anti-Semitism, called for the Justice Department to investigate whether Miss Rachel should be required to register as a foreign agent. A foreign agent. For talking about kids in Gaza. Let that sink in. They later included her among their nominees for Anti-Semite of the Year. That's a real thing they do. She was on the list. And again, I kept reading, I kept scrolling, I kept waiting for the part that would finally make this make sense to me. The part where I go, oh, okay, now I see why people are this angry. Except here's the thing. Here's the piece that keeps getting conveniently left out of the narrative. Miss Rachel has also publicly advocated for Israeli children. She's spoken about the Israeli hostages. She's expressed support for Ariel and Kfir Babas, the two little boys who were taken captive, whose faces have become symbols of a horror that no child should ever experience. She's talked about them, out loud, on camera. And she has explicitly, repeatedly, almost frustratingly clearly said that her concern includes Palestinian children, Israeli children, children in America, Muslim children, Jewish children, Christian children, all children, not one group excluded, not one child left out. So somebody help me here. Somebody please explain it. Because if the criticism is that Miss Rachel only cares about Palestinian children, what are we supposed to do with all the evidence that she has publicly, visibly, unambiguously cared about Israeli children too? You can't just ignore that. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. You can't keep running the same narrative when the receipts are right there. And that's the thing. That's what makes this so psychologically fascinating to me. Because now we're not dealing with a simple disagreement anymore. Now we're dealing with something much deeper. Something about how we process information that doesn't fit our narrative. Something about how we decide who's allowed to care about whom. Something about why compassion becomes controversial only when it crosses certain invisible lines.
So Miss Rachel posted, "Black boys deserve to grow up." How is that controversial? Oh, right, because all lives matter, right? So you can say all lives matter, but you get triggered when she says feed all children?
When I found out Rahaf was coming, I wanted to help her have the best day ever. I called a place in New York City that I thought Rahaf would have a great time at. And I explained that she's a double amputee, she's 3. I explained that there would be no press, no pictures, just her having an amazing time. And I was talking to the business owner, and the business owner said, let me think about it. And I was just crushed. I didn't understand why she would say she needed to think about it. I realized it wasn't going to be a good atmosphere, so I just said, actually, never mind, I'm going to try somewhere else. And then she said, yeah, so sorry, it's really complicated. And I was like, it's actually not complicated. So then I called another place, and this time I was very hesitant on the phone explaining the situation, but I did explain there'd be no press, no photos, so I was gonna rent the whole place. So there'd be no other customers, which you can do for a birthday at these places. And the woman on the phone was so kind, and she said, definitely. She said, we even have a Palestinian employee. So I was so touched. This is gonna be so great, and I'm so excited. And then I got an email a few days later saying, we have to cancel due to the safety of our staff. And I was in shock because actually, in both circumstances, it's illegal to say you can't rent this space for, a birthday party, like an event, because you're bringing a Palestinian person. I just can't imagine what that employee felt, because the person who owns the place was basically saying, because this little girl is Palestinian like you, she's not welcome here. Could have said, I'm gonna rent the whole space for a kid's party and just shown up. I shouldn't have had to ask permission, but I guess I just thought maybe I should, and that maybe they'd make it extra special. Oh, and then the fourth place I called, I didn't even mention the first one because it's a long story, but the fourth place I called, explain the situation, and they were like, of course, we're so excited, you can take pictures, you can do anything here, everyone's welcome. And I don't even want to say where the business was that welcomed us with the most beautiful open arms, because I don't want them to get backlash for having her, who gave Rahaf the most amazing day ever.
Miss Rachel, everyone's favorite preschool teacher from YouTube, just got named one of the year's top anti-Semites by a pro-Israel group. Yeah, no, I'm being dead serious, okay? And what did Miss Rachel do to earn this label? She asked people to care about children experiencing a genocide in Gaza. Now, the sweet voice teacher, called the modern-day Mr. Rogers by many, has used her massive platform to stand up for kids in Gaza. And instead of just talking about numbers, Miss Rachel shares stories. She introduced us to a child, an adorable 3-year-old who lost both of their legs in a bombing. Miss Rachel brings children on her show all the time that are experiencing a genocide in Gaza to sing. And while politicians are cowards and refuse to even call what's happening in Gaza a genocide, Miss Rachel keeps it real by saying kids need food, kids need medicine, kids should not be blown up. She points out that over 18,000 children have been killed and that Gaza now has the most child amputees in history, and simply asks how could anybody think that this is okay. And she's even teamed up with the Palestine Children's Relief Fund to help get injured kids medical treatment. And even when attacked and called a foreign agent, Miss Rachel stays gentle but firm. She never backs down. So there you have it. Miss Rachel's terrible anti-Semitic crime is believing that Palestinian children deserve to eat.
There's a pretty uncomfortable pattern underneath all of this. We like people who confirm the version of the world we already have in our heads. That's not because we're stupid. Human beings do this constantly. Information that fits comfortably into what we already believe, easy, smooth. Information that threatens our identity, our group, or even just our expectations of another person, that creates friction. And Miss Rachel creates a particularly interesting kind of friction. Because she's not somebody most people originally encountered through politics. Nobody discovered Miss Rachel during an election debate. You found her because somebody in your house needed to learn the difference between an apple and a banana. She entered people's lives as a safe person, a trusted person. And I think that's important, because when somebody we've categorized as safe suddenly says something that makes us uncomfortable, we don't always experience it as normal disagreement. Sometimes it feels like a violation, like they broke the terms of the relationship. That's where the parasocial part becomes really interesting. We don't actually know Miss Rachel. Most of us will never meet her. But familiarity creates this strange illusion that we understand someone. You know her voice. Your child recognizes her face. She's been playing in your living room while you're cooking dinner. After enough exposure, your brain doesn't process that person like a complete stranger anymore. So when that person says something you strongly disagree with, the reaction can become surprisingly personal. I used to love you. You've changed. Just go back to teaching children. And maybe sometimes the person really has changed. But I'm not convinced that's what we're watching here. Because if you strip away all the politics, Miss Rachel's underlying message has been almost painfully consistent. Children deserve compassion. That's it. The controversy begins when she starts naming the children, when children becomes Palestinian children, when children becomes Nolan Wells. Suddenly, the abstract becomes specific, and that's where everything gets complicated. That's where motivated reasoning enters the picture. We are incredibly good at examining information differently depending on whether it threatens something we already believe. When suffering happens to someone we already identify with, compassion comes naturally. We see the person. We see the suffering. We care. Immediate. Instinctive. But when the suffering involves someone associated with the other side, suddenly our brains become lawyers. Well, technically, you have to understand the history. We build a wall of qualifications before we let ourselves feel anything. And sometimes context genuinely does matter. Of course it does. But it's worth noticing how quickly we require context before allowing ourselves to feel empathy for certain people, especially children. That's where I keep coming back to Miss Rachel. She's advocated for Palestinian children. She's advocated for Israeli children. She's spoken about Israeli hostages. And now, she's spoken about Nolan Wells and his family's demand for answers. I'm struggling to see this dramatic transformation people keep describing. What I see is somebody applying the same principle to different situations, over and over. And maybe that's what actually makes people uncomfortable, because universal principles sound wonderful until they're actually universal. Every child deserves compassion sounds beautiful, until every includes somebody your political group doesn't particularly want to talk about today. And this is where the stay in your lane thing becomes fascinating, because we love celebrities using their platforms when they're supporting something we agree with. This is how you use your platform. But when they speak on something we disagree with, suddenly we're pulling out the employee handbook. Excuse me, you're actually supposed to sing. So maybe stay in your lane means something slightly different. Maybe it means stay inside the version of you that I was comfortable with. And that's a human reaction, because cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable. If I've decided Miss Rachel represents kindness and goodness, and then she says something I strongly disagree with, my brain has a problem. Either I reconsider what she said, I reconsider what I believe, or I reconsider Miss Rachel. And sometimes the easiest option is, she changed. She became political. Somebody got to her. Because that allows my worldview to remain intact. The problem exists entirely inside her. And again, sometimes that conclusion might be correct. People change. But we should at least be curious about how quickly our brains reach for that explanation, especially when the person's underlying principle appears remarkably consistent. And there's one more piece of this I think matters. Moral consistency is expensive. It's very easy to have principles when those principles earn applause. It's harder when they cost you something. Followers, reputation, peace, the ability to open your phone without discovering that 12,000 strangers have diagnosed your entire personality before breakfast? Miss Rachel knows speaking about these things brings backlash. She's experienced it repeatedly, and she continues. She has said that silence wasn't a choice for her. And whether you agree with her or not, there's something interesting about reaching the point where maintaining your internal sense of integrity becomes more important than maintaining universal approval. Maybe that's the real question underneath all of this. Not, is Miss Rachel right? Of course not. Nobody is. Not even, should celebrities talk about politics? That's too simple. Maybe the better question is, what happens when someone we love for their values starts applying those values somewhere we don't want them applied? Because that's when we find out whether we actually admired the principle or just the situations where it was convenient. Personally, I don't see the scandal. I see a children's educator saying she cares about children. Palestinian children, Israeli children, American children, children whose names become hashtags and children will never know. You can disagree with how she interprets events. You can argue that public figures should be more cautious. But I don't think compassion becomes suspicious simply because the person expressing it has a children's YouTube channel. But I know some of you disagree, and I want to hear from you. Not Miss Rachel is woke. Not Sage, you're an idiot. Give me something to work with. If she crossed a line, tell me where. Was it Gaza? Nolan Wells? Commenting on an active investigation? Do children's entertainers have a different responsibility? That's an interesting argument. Make that argument. And if you agree, don't just write Team Miss Rachel. I want to know something harder. Do people with enormous platforms actually have a responsibility to speak up? Because I'm not completely convinced they do. Here's another question. Have you ever really liked a public figure until they said something you strongly disagreed with? What happened? Did you stop following them? Did you reconsider your own position? Did you see them differently? If we're being truthful, most of us have experienced some version of that. And that's what makes stories like this worth examining. The maladaptive variable isn't one person behaving strangely. It's the pattern that appears when thousands of us react to the same thing. Miss Rachel may be at the center of this one, but the psychology? That's ours. I'm Sage. This is Maladaptive Variable. I'll see you in the next one.